thank you. So I think let's everyone say thank you to John Rush. And we're gonna open it up for questions from everyone now. I still have about 4 more, but I want to give everyone a chance. So who would like to ask first question? Okay.
Maybe I can ask one question. Since you know a lot about Jewish tradition and Jewish history, so I'm interested in this one interesting thing. I know that there were like 12 Jewish tribes, and one got lost in this movement of Jewish people. Do you know anything about this lost tribe?
Well, it depends on how you want to consider the myth. Is this a story of history? Is Exodus, if you will, a history lesson? I don't think it is. I think what the Old Testament is what's called a mythical charter to give a special people special privileges and land holdings. You have to understand that the Hebrew were probably the most literate people in the Middle East for a long, long time, and the reason for that is their stay in Egypt. And they identified themselves with the priests and the upper class. I mean, why start at the bottom? Essentially, in the Jewish tradition, all the men are rabbis. They're all teachers in that sense. And they borrowed many things that would emulate the priests in ancient Egypt. The idea of circumcision and all that, that's where all that comes from. But the point is that the tribes, I mean, were there 12 tribes? We can see that the tribes that are talked about and the dispersion of them comes about after the sons go into a village and kill everybody because Diana was raped and so on and so forth. But to me, this is simply a good story to be taken as a metaphor of a people who actually are pretty tired roaming around in the desert and whatever, and wanting to establish a nation of themselves and to develop a book, if you will, that would give them special landholding and privileges. And that's what they did. See, this literacy allowed them to write a book, and of course, if it's in print, it has to be true. And so they can refer back to this book to indicate their special status. So I don't read the Old Testament as a history lesson. There's history in it, but it's sort of like Michener's Hawaii. There's history there, but the storyline is that, just a story.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Okay, and really? I'll ask another one then. Since we deal a lot with philosophy in this group, what role, if any, does philosophy play in these insights?
Well, your philosophy, your myth, directs the culture. It gives you a base from which to operate. To give you an example of this, our philosophy here in the West is that, in a general sense, that nature is corrupt. And we get this coming out of the Old Testament, really. The corruption occurs when Eve couldn't follow instructions and assumed that it would be good to be intelligent and to just not go along with the orders of the deity and consume the fruit. I mean, we wouldn't have a story if she didn't disobey the deity. But we have this idea in the West that nature's corrupt and needs to be corrected. And this is what our science is used to do. We want to get rid of disease. We want to get rid of discomfort. We want to fix things up so we always have plenty of food and so on and so forth. So our philosophy directs our science. Now, in ancient Egypt, their philosophy of reaching the other side, this idea of resurrection, is what directed their science. And the person that had to be totally within this resurrection business certainly was the Pharaoh. You had to fix him up, so he got on the sunbark and would light the heavens during the day and fight the primeval evil at night, and then reemerge as the sun. And so their science, and they had a very elaborate science and a medical science as well, was really directed at getting the person to the afterlife, to the field of reeds, for the average person anyway. And so we can see the importance of the philosophies, of the myths, in terms of directing people. Now, in our society, we have a problem with this now because our myths don't line up with our science anymore. And this causes real problems. Think about this. For a short period, on Sunday or Saturday or Friday, people are with this spiritual world, and then on Monday morning, they have to get back to this scientific world that we live within. And this causes a lot of problems psychologically. But at any rate, philosophy becomes very important in terms of how people do things, how they make decisions. The use of these substances, if you will, would fit into this very nicely. A philosophy that suggests that communing with the gods would be through, for example, a mushroom, a god, the mushroom, or was part of all of this. This philosophy would be very important in terms of directing the culture and making decisions. And it always has been. Science itself cannot stand by itself. It always has to have some philosophy that drives it.
Okay, Tom?
Just wanted to ask about the nature of what you think the drugs were available in first the Egyptian time, second Jesus's time.
What substances would have been available?
Yeah, to the pharaohs, and what substance was available around Jesus's time, and perhaps the Middle Ages as well.
Yeah, there's a vast number of them. Starting at the top, we have cannabis. Cannabis, probably one of the oldest substances that we can document. It's fairly easy to grow. It's cosmopolitan, grows all over the place. Probably agriculture and aspects of agriculture developed out of this idea that you could take seeds and spread them around, particularly for the shamans. The hunter-gatherers in Europe, for example, going back 9, 10, 11,000 years ago, would disperse these seeds, so they always had cannabis. The other substance, Amanita muscaria, the holy mushroom, would be very available, particularly in mountain areas, because it grows in conjunction with pine trees, birch trees, oak trees, this type of thing. Henbane is another one. There's Egyptian henbane and European henbane. You have different types of datura and atropa or belladonna type formulas that grow all over the place. I have many of these plants in my garden. I don't grow cannabis. I suppose I could, but I don't. I have the daturas and the belladonnas and the henbanes, all of these types of plants. There's just a wide variety of these, and then there's combinations of these plants. Now you have to understand our ancient ancestors going back 1.5 million years to understand how they understood about these plants. If you go back to about 1.7 million years ago, an ancestor of ours that we can relate to ourselves for sure, and that's Homo erectus, leaves Africa. Now, Homo erectus leaving Africa, we need plants. We just can't live on meat. It'll kill us. It subjects us to oxidative stress, and so we need the phytochemicals in plants. You leave Africa and you bump into different types of plants, and people are going to have to take bioassays to find out if they're edible and what they do to you. And out of this, these bioassays, if you will, that our ancient ancestors went through, which would have been very dangerous in many cases, they developed the science of botany. They would have learned that certain plants would have altered their consciousness, certain plants would have made them throw up, other plants would have stopped stomach ache, for example, certain types of sage and so on. Other plants expelled worms. And so over time, they collected a vast knowledge of this, and they would pass this on. Early on, you didn't have a lot of specialists, and so everybody was a carrier of the culture, and everybody knew about these substances. As time went on, these substances and their uses would be left to specialists. First of all, the shamans. They would probably have special knowledge. And then the priests that show up, larger societies, the city-states and the nation-states, if you will. In these nation-states, you have the warrior chief and the magician priest. The magician priest would use substances which would be available sometimes of the year, and other times of the year they're not. In desert areas, certain plants aren't available, and we can trace trade routes where mushrooms have to be dried, for example, to be consumed. The psilocybin, which grows all over the place, the Entheogens muscaria, these have to be dried before they're used, and these travel well in terms of trade. So we have psilocybin mushrooms, the Entheogens muscaria I've already mentioned. We have Syrian rue. We have ephedra. One of the substances that's been connected to soma, for example, and many substances have been theorized in terms of what soma was. We do have some evidence left over from residues in pots in Afghanistan, for example, show that soma was a combination of ephedra, opium, and cannabis. If you can imagine that mixture, that would be a very dangerous mixture. The ephedra could give you a heart attack. The opium is going to put you to sleep, and so the ephedra is there to keep you awake. And of course, the cannabis gets you in a deep inner state. And so that combination would have been something they would have experimented with a long period of time to be able to use it and not kill somebody. So once again, there's just a large variety of substances. In China, there are all kinds of psilocybin mushrooms, probably in Europe area as well. Many plants contain dimethyltryptamine, filarius grass, coleus. There's just so many of these plants that you consume on a daily basis, but the DMT is not orally active, so you don't get a buzz out of it. You have to sort of prepare these substances. There are preparations, for example, in South America, ayahuasca, which is Banasteropsis caapi vine, and Psychotrochus viridis. Psychotrochus viridis has the MT in it, and the Banasteropsis caapi vine contains the beta carbolines, which high up the serotonin in the stomach, so it's then becomes orally active. That's a bad trip. That's the combination there. You kind of have to get used to that. The filarius grass, which is easy to grow, high levels of dimethyltryptamine, easy to process. Again, these substances are available all over the place. Now, the different cultures used some of these things about them. I don't know, because DMT is not orally active. They may not have known that unless accidentally they combined a couple of the chemicals. Now, animals consuming certain plants like hellebore or other substances like that, the chemicals end up in their meat and in their milk. And we learned that animals, when they consume, then you consume the animal, you could go to God's place on that. So there are many combinations and many usual mixtures, if you will, that we bump into in these different cultures.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Yep.
You mentioned earlier in passing that Jesus was a mushroom. Can you explain what does it mean?
Okay, I should have run off some other pictures of this, but there is no historical visibility for Jesus or a man by the name of Jesus whatsoever in Palestine at this time period that is attributed to him. If there was somebody by this name who was going around doing wonderful things and curing people and bringing people back from the dead and all of this, you would assume that some Jewish historian would have written about this. But there is absolutely no information on this. Now, we do have Josephus's Jewish Wars, and there is a little paragraph in there regarding Jesus, but we know it's a forgery because we have earlier editions of Josephus's Jewish Wars, and he was not necessarily a contemporary with Jesus, but shortly after our mythic hero Jesus died, he writes. But we know it's a forgery. His earlier books didn't have that reference in there. They didn't have a reference to Brother James either. So I know it's a forgery who did it. Eusebius of Caesarea. It's a wonderful story about Eusebius, who was a very intelligent priest who was told by Constantine to get these people to stop killing each other and fighting with one another. And Constantine legalized Christianity. I don't believe he ever became a Christian himself. But the fact that they have forward history suggests that he was a person. Now, when you read some of the other Gospels, for example, Thomas, you very clearly get the idea that Jesus is other than. In the Thomas Gospels, he says, "My mouth will be me and I, he, and all the secret be revealed." That's pretty telling what's going on here with this. Jesus was an experience, and he was an experience gathered through the use of these substances. Let me talk a little bit parable, because this enters into this as well. All these, there may have been a person by the name of John the Baptist. We're not quite sure if there was such a person, but there may have been. But there were people like John the Baptist who were going around and trying to educate people. The story of John the Baptist is that he comes out of the wilderness and he delivers important information to people. John the Baptist is probably symbolic of Onis, or the deity Ah, going back into the Mesopotamian tradition. But at any rate, in order to get into these groups, because not everyone was welcome, forget this idea of Jesus communicating with the multitudes from a boat of, he's got 5,000 people in front of him. The Romans would have never have allowed 5,000 people to congregate anywhere because they wouldn't have been able to handle them. All they had were sticks and swords. They didn't have tear gas and rubber bullets. And so any group that got any larger, 20 people, they would disperse them. These groups met in secret. And a person who wanted to join would be given a parable or a story to answer. If he could answer the story correctly, he would be eligible to commune with God. And so these were just small groups of people. However, they did have different storylines. They didn't get along with each other. The pagans didn't get along with them for whatever reason. And so there was a lot of strife going on back there. And so these small little groups, if you will, some of them could communicate with each other and not kill each other. And it's those groups that eventually united to become what's called Christianity. Christianity, the storyline of it, and all the Gospels, if you will, that's all invented after about 325 of the current era. The Gospels, if you will, and you can check this out, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are based on the canopic jars that come out of ancient Egypt. The canopic jars, if you look at them, the ones that came out of the New Kingdom, they represent totally Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I get into an elaborate discussion in a Mushroom Christian Art book. I won't get into it now. But this idea of parables, answering stories that allow you to get into these groups was very, very important. Once again, these groups accentuated the idea of seeking knowledge and knowing yourself, and that was the basis of these groups. All that was added later, beyond those three things, can be seen as the development of a political tradition.
Okay, good. Other questions? Yep.
I want to ask you about the theory that I've read about, explaining some religious and mystical experiences that people had in Europe in middle centuries, and the explanation for this was that often they were eating unfresh and the molded bread, and the mold had some kind of a chemical structure similar to LSD, I believe, and they didn't have any means to explain those things because they didn't expect it, right? If you take any substance, you expect things, and they were just eating bread, and then so they were expressing all those experiences through the language that they knew. It was the language of the Christianity, right? And how do you relate to it? And could you develop this?
Yeah, for the most part, what you're talking about is ergot fungus that will grow on barley, sometimes wheat. And although this substance was used probably in the Eleusinian Mysteries, it was a family apparently that was involved in making the wine, if you will, that contained this. But you're right, in some of these European villages, they would eat this very interesting nun that she dates to about 1130 of the current era. She is a very interesting story, wonderful article in the new book on her. What she shows us is how the Catholic tradition developed by certain people having experiences. She did. She was all kinds of substances, if you will. And she became an important person. When we get into about 1250, 1300, or whatever, we start getting into global cooling and the Inquisition and plagues and all that, and that stopped. But special people were able to commune with the gods, if you will, and some of this information enters into the storyline that we find coming out of the Catholic Church. And Hildegard is just only one of probably a number of people out there who were allowed to take these substances and commune with God. And she was a very she was recently seen. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, other questions? We have about 7 minutes. 6 minutes. Other questions?
Yeah. I want to know about the
You
star.
gotta speak up probably a little bit.
Oh, I want to know about this the star that everyone followed at Christmas time and went to the birth of Jesus, and about Mary and Joseph. Did they not exist, or that story doesn't really exist, or how is that explained?
Once again, these are metaphors, if you will. This is a storyline, and the star is simply a statement for people to follow. You've got these Zoroastrians, if you will. That would be the we three kings of Orient Arc and so on and so forth. This is simply a statement that people now are turning toward Christianity or Jesus. Mother Mary and her mother Anne, if Jesus wasn't a real person, then you can't have a mother and you can't have a grandmother. And the way I look at this, Jesus, as far as I can determine, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful here, I'm trying to understand what's the history of all of this. Jesus, I believe, was a mushroom, and his connection to Mary is that Mary would be the roots of the pine tree off of which the mushroom grows, and Saint Anne would be the pine tree herself. The Lebanese cedar tree was considered to be God in the Old Testament, and we can see a connection here between Saint Anne, Mother Mary, and Jesus by considering the tree itself. Again, these are metaphors, and it's not important that Jesus was a real person. Some people have to have him as a real person, but what he was saying is very simple, and if you go by these, you're in. It's very simple. Know thyself. Know who you are. The second thing is seek knowledge. And the third thing is simply be a decent person. That's all that was offered out there, and it didn't work. Why did not people stay with that idea? Well, it was too corrupting to the people who were in power. They weren't going to seek knowledge. They were going to know themselves, and they weren't going to be decent people, and so they weren't going to let anybody else do it. Maybe it would fit today, I don't know. So bound up in all the politics that go along with the church. In other words, all these players in the Old Testament and the New Testament, none of these people are real. We can see Joseph in the Old Testament, Moses, we kind of know who they were because they were drawn out of Egypt. But the rest of these people, it's really problematical as to whether they were real or not. And it's really not important. It's what the story is trying to impart to the reader or the listener.
Okay. Last questions? Okay, I got one then. So how does this relate? I know maybe you can just try to say this in a couple minutes. But how does this relate to the alien among us? I know that would be a whole nother speech, but I really want to get it in for the YouTube viewers.
Okay. The ancient alien hunters have come up with some really bogus stuff, but I'll give them credit for this. What they're attempting to do is switch out the gods for ancient aliens coming in. There's some real problems with this. The examples that they use to show that aliens have come here in spaceships and whatever, none of that can be verified. As an anthropologist, I can guarantee you that a lot of the things that they're saying are just absolute nonsense. There is a YouTube, it's a 3-hour YouTube called Ancient Aliens Debunked.
Yeah, great. That was a great YouTube video.
Yeah, it's a very interesting a video. But as far as I'm concerned, a lot of their stuff is just good entertainment. However, people watch this, and as Hitler said, tell people the most ridiculous story in the world and they'll believe it. And people have a tendency to believe this. What they're attempting to do, once again, is to read the old myths as some sort of history and as some sort of contact with aliens. But again, there's look at it this way. We've got all these mushrooms and other plants that are in the art. And if the ancient alien hunters can explain that away, maybe they've got a case. But they have not spoken to these art forms that we find, the mushrooms that are very clearly there and the other plants that are clearly there. They have not spoken to this at all. As a matter of fact, they have not put online or in the History Channel their latest season. And I think the reason that they didn't is because all their stuff has been debunked, and all you're watching now are the older programs. So I wouldn't necessarily buy into this ancient alien things. I don't know if aliens have been here or not, but certainly the examples they give don't convince me of anything.
So, but why are modern people so obsessed with aliens, and does that relate to entheogens at all?
Well, what it relates to is that we don't have a myth anymore that supports the mystery of life and death, and so people are looking for answers. And Darwin tore away the older storyline of the age of the Earth being 4004 BC and all that. He ripped all of that away, and other authors have done the same thing. So we don't have a myth that supports this idea of life and death and where we came from anymore. It's all sort of up in the air. And so we do have a scientific philosophy, and of course the ancient alien hunters do tap into that. And so that's probably why people are more readily into that than they are the God story.
Okay. Any last questions? No?
Yeah.
Okay, one last question. Quick one.
What about people who exercise or in out-of-body experiences, and they don't have to take drugs to do that? In fact, drugs sometimes impede that. But they've written about it, like Robert Monroe, for example, wrote about out-of-body experiences, leaving the body to check out. Is that also kind of explained by your theory?
Yeah, out-of-body experiences, I think that probably, I wouldn't say all of us have them. I've certainly had out-of-body experiences without the benefit of substances. You have to understand what the substances do. The substances are simply triggering things. And you have THC receptors in your brain. They're already there. And under stress, under extreme duress, being very, very tired, and so on and so forth, we can tap into these abilities to experience this sort of out-of-body experience. But really, are you out of body, or is this just something that your mind is doing to you? So you don't need drugs necessarily to get to the other side. The point is, if you need to make a decision today, and you need the information right now, you can't wait around for an out-of-body experience, or an illness, or a fever for this to happen. This is where these substances come in, because you can have this experience now. And this is what people did, and they've been doing this for thousands and thousands. It still goes on. You see, in the Catholic Church, it still goes on. They won't admit it, but you see, if you change the symbols, if you remove the symbols from the system, they lose their power. And so they hedge their bet. And I know, I can't prove this, but I know in my own mind that there are cardinals and bishops and certainly the Pope that will use it to get to the other side, because again, to abandon the symbols, they will lose their power.
Okay, thanks. I think we got to call it a night and a good morning for you. And I'll talk to you soon and take care. Thanks.
Okay.